If Australia was to get involved in any potential war here in Taiwan, would we then potentially get attacked from Chinese forces?
China wouldn't be able to attack Australia unless they have Taiwan. That's for sure. So, but once Taiwan is done, then Australia could be the next target.
From a military point of view then, are we ready for war?
I don't think we are.
A case in point is our active Defence Force personnel. Combining its 1 million troops with other personnel, China has over 2 million. America, around 1.4 million. Australia, 60,000. There's a plan to get us to 80,000. Is that enough?
Growing the Defence Force by 20,000 people over the next 2 decades, that's a big target, and we definitely need the people to crew submarines, to conduct cyber capabilities and operations, to do a number of the emerging jobs that probably don't exist yet but will in 10 years or so. But I think recruitment and then retention is the biggest challenge we face in the Defence Force.
How weakened have our defence forces become?
Well, it doesn't take long for a military organisation to lose readiness when it's not able to practice what it does.
A more immediate issue for the ADF is its current state of readiness. In recent years, nearly 1/3 of our defence forces have been tied up with natural disasters and the COVID pandemic.
When we respond to large-scale disasters here and overseas, it takes away defence assets. And when you have large amphibious ships and large parts of the army cleaning up after floods, fighting bushfires, or overseas, they're not able to train for what is their principal role, which is to be a deterrent against threats against Australia or to respond to those threats in a military way.
Right, whose fault's that?
Well, obviously it's the government. I mean, they're the ones who make these calls. That probably was not the right thing to be doing because we now have a military that is a lower readiness than it needs to be.
Ready or not, the ADF now faces major challenges.
We do need to be thinking about whether or not the Defence Force we have now is fit in terms of the strategic landscape that we face, and it is very different. There is much greater threat. We must have the ability to project
Sure.
power. We need to be able to hold any potential adversary at risk at greater distance from our shores.
Which brings us to submarines. Our current crop have arguably reached their use-by date, so replacing them is now a top priority for the Albanese government.
The AUKUS arrangements are progressing and we continue to undertake cooperative discussions with the United Kingdom and the United States.
The first major initiative of AUKUS.
AUKUS is the security pact that was set up between Australia, the UK and the US in 2021.
I think what that does is it represents a unity in the Pacific that is absolutely critical in dealing with North Korea, in dealing with China, and in dealing with other threats in that region.
In terms of AUKUS, how important is it that that proceeds as planned?
Critical. I think we'd lose a massive amount of face if we didn't proceed with AUKUS, but it's not about face, it's actually about capability. Nuclear submarines will provide that, in addition to our surface fleet. But absolutely critical, and it will also more closely integrate us with the US and the UK.
Under the three-nation agreement, Australia has committed to buying a fleet of 8 nuclear-powered submarines. Some estimates put the cost at above $100 billion, and the delivery timeline more than a decade away, possibly up to 2 decades.
I think the nuclear submarines are a very good idea for a really long-term objective. But what are we going to do next year or the year after or in 5 years' time?
Should we be getting subs that are off the shelf? Is that something that should be considered?
Oh, absolutely. I think subs off the shelf should be part of the plan. In fact, we should be doing it concurrently. But my view is that we should be building our industrial capacity here, and we should also be seeking to get 2 boats off a production line out of the US. If not the US, then the UK.
We are thinking about the next few years. We're thinking about the 2030s and the 2040s.
Right.
We're thinking about what the world might look like over that period of time. And in a sense, the right analysis is to look at the worst case scenario and make sure that we have a defence force that can maintain our way of life over that period of time, no matter what we
Sure,
face.
okay, but, you know, China's certainly getting ready for war. It seems to be on a war footing at the moment.
What we need to do is to make sure that we maximise our defence force posture so as to protect our interests.
The AUKUS Pact will also beef up America's military presence in the north of Australia.
We recognise where Australia is and how when its capability begins to diminish, and of course we will address all of that in that pathway that we create, and so we will not allow Australia to have a capability gap going forward.
America has long used Australia as a key strategic outpost. There's Pine Gap, the spy station that's believed to provide signals intelligence and early warning on missile launches. In WA, the radar facility near Exmouth provides critical communication links to US and Australian naval forces in the Indo-Pacific. The Tyndall Air Force Base is used by the Americans, and Marines are routinely stationed in Darwin. Now, there's more to come.
We will increase rotational presence of U.S. forces in Australia. That includes rotations of bomber task forces, fighters, and future rotations of U.S. Navy and U.S. Army capabilities.
It's a clear example of how the Americans are thinking about the importance of the strategic geography of Australia and specifically of the Northern Territory.
John Coyne is with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute.
This isn't a new thing for them. So we look back to the Cold War, Pine Gap was put down, but Australia was important then, but its importance has grown significantly. Now, for a couple of different things, there's pure geography about this. It's about distances, so in a simple military planning, it's the Goldilocks location. Close enough to the Indo-Pacific to be meaningful, far enough away from most threats to be struck and destroyed or disrupted.
At the end of the day, a conflict between the United States and China would be nothing short of catastrophic. It would not be a short war, and we should be very clear about that.
The economic fallout for Australia from a war to our north would be catastrophic. Shipping lanes could be blocked. Vital supply lines could be cut off. Our nation could quite literally be brought to its knees.
We're an island nation. We rely upon a lot of seaborne trade, and it's really, really important that those lines of trade are protected, because without fuel, we've got big problems.
Australia relies heavily on fuel